So chapter 6 is kind of short. Chapter 7 is much longer. So I'm going to do a quick overview of the stuff covered in chapter 6, which is materials. Okay, objectives. Please read chapter 6, watch the embedded videos, understand the types of materials there are, and what are the 3 material qualities to consider and why, and just material considerations in general. Some different materials that are used are wood, which is primarily for framing and structural material used in set construction. There's a whole bunch of different types of wood you can use, and with the wood, it could be stuff that you see and then stuff that you don't see. Flats are usually made out of wood, and so these flats can be either just like a bracing of wood on the background with then a piece of with a flat facing of a wood sheet as well, which that could be painted into whatever you need. And then also wood can be used, or you can use canvas to cover the bracing for a different kind of look. So if somebody wanted to have the flat in the background be a sunset and they painted a sunset, they would paint it on the canvas first a lot of the times, and then you would staple it on the wood. And then wood is also used for platforms. And platforms are what people walk on. And I mean, yes, you walk on the stage, but if you want different levels, if a director wants different levels, 2 stories, or just like a little lip to be like, this is the stage, which signifies the outside, and then all of a sudden there's one step, and then that platform is the house, and then that's what you see. So every time you're off the platform, you're in a different space as when you are on the platform. And a good majority of like sets we'd make at NCT, at UNLV, or like just in general, are made out of wood, and then they're just painted. Next, we have metal, which adds a level of visual sophistication due to the reflectance of light and industrial aesthetic. So metal I'm going to talk about how it's used in a design versus used in not a design. Metal is stronger than wood, and it's sometimes easier. So like we have 12-foot flats that are just in stock at UNLV in our shop. Those are made out of metal because those are going to last a lot longer, and then you can just put whatever facing of wood on top of it. And metal is also used to make platforms if you want them to be stronger. They'll have a base of metal and then the wood on top. Metal is used for railing, and railing is, when you're on a staircase, and it's required to have railing if your set is really, really tall. We did a show called Marcus last year, and you needed railing because it was, I don't know, it was like 12 feet tall. It's pretty tall. And when it comes into conversation of railing or rails, if it's seen by the audience, the designer gets to choose if they want it to be a metal or if they want it to be wood, which is painted or not painted or whatever. But if it's backstage, it's the choice of the TD. And in a lot of cases, it's just whatever you have on hand. Wood is probably easier because you just grab a 2x4 and then like mash it together, whereas with metal you would have to weld. And also using metal, not in design but like for sets, a lot of theater companies, depending on the side, they don't have a shop to fabricate the metal or to weld things together and do all of that, so they would probably use wood as their material of choice. And then one specific example, again from UNLV, we did Legally Blonde a couple years ago, and we used some corrugated metal, which it's lighter, and that was used for the trailer park and or not the trailer park, but there's a trailer because Paulette is trying to get her dog back from her sleazy ex-boyfriend, and she goes to his trailer, and so the front of that was this metal, so it gave off that kind of like tin can rusted feel. Then we have plastic, which is extruded, flexible, and moldable product. I'm going to talk about 2 examples that I know of plastic used on sets. Apparently, a pillow was on my microphone for that take. So, hey, I'm taking a take in the theater during filming for you guys to make up for the sound. Anyway, so we did a show called The African Company, And in old stages, you have the seashells that are facing the stage where lighting or the little light bulbs are to kind of give it that old feel. That's what we wanted for our stage for the show. And so we had some seashells in stock, but they were a little bit too big for what the director and designer were envisioning. And so we actually were able to 3D print them instead of going out and buying some, because the seashells can be very expensive. And so it was an alternative way, because of new technologies, that you could use plastic and the filament to create, used to make a whole bunch of stuff. And then another example of plastic being used in set is when you have plexiglass. So you're obviously not going to use real glass so you use the plexiglass because it looks like glass. Then another example, a show I did in 2014, we had to have a DDR board for the guy. It was an interesting play. He went to the underworld, and like his way to get his soul out, he had to play DDR. Fabric. Um, you use fabric for the clothing or the costume, theatrical soft goods, and upholstered. So obviously you use fabric for costumes. The majority of a costume is made up of fabric, and I say only majority because there are things like if they have armor, that would be made out of probably plastic. If they have hats, that could be made out of a different material, again, like a hard material, like if it's a hard hat, like plastic. Um, and then if it's a specialty show, like we did Lion Witch in the Wardrobe a couple years ago, Mr. Tumnus had hooves that he stood on. Those were in no way fabric. Those were also plastic, so he could stand on them, and they were shoes. So yes, fabric is used for costume. Theatrical soft goods refer to the legs or masking that's in the theater, and the legs are the curtains that are on the side. Those are fabrics. The curtains that a lot of grand theaters have that come in, the red curtain, like for an opera, that's also fabric. And then masking is just black fabric that's used to help fill in gaps. Like if you have a 2-story set and it's on wooden stilts to make it the second story, you don't want the audience to be able to see through the bottom and see backstage. So you would use black fabric or masking to staple, so then it becomes a dark zone that the audience can't see. And the same thing with if you do a show in a black box, a lot of times they have curtains all around the perimeter, so then audience members don't see the backstage as well. And then reupholstering, something you do in theater a lot, is reupholstered fabric. I've actually reupholstered a couple things in my time here working on props, and I had no idea how to do that. And honestly, it's not the way that I think a professional person who would reupholster a couch or a chair would do it. I just did it with prayers, a lot of staples, and pulling. So, but I will show you some pictures of some of the things I reupholstered. But I've done a couch, some chairs, and I did a coffin even. Sound. Consider architecture and materials. How do the materials absorb or bounce sound? If you have a stage which is very bare and there aren't a lot of materials on stage and there's not a lot of soft goods, you might get a lot of bounce back and you will not absorb sounds. Masking and some of those fabric products, like having the legs or like curtains around, will help mask sounds on stage and like not let the sounds bounce against the walls. So that's something to think about. And then like light, adding or subtraction of color and texture, that's something to think about. Also with not only light, but your color and texture material against the set. So if it's a set that everything is green and then you have characters in green costumes, that's not a good choice because then everything kind of blends together. So you want to help each other out in the design. Some questions to consider are: how do the materials change color absorb or reflect light. Black clothing absorbs lighting, so it's harder to light, and white clothing reflects. And when I'm stage managing a show, I always try to ask my actors to wear whatever color their costumes might be. So if they know they're wearing something purple for the majority of the show, if they have some sort of purple shirt or dress or whatever, to wear that. So then the lighting designer can kind of see how their lights play on that color and work with this, how it all works in the space with them. Light location and instrument location can change the perceived focus or feel and mood on the stage. I feel like that explains itself. And people react to how light or lack of light and the performer interact. And then think of dance lighting, because dance lighting, you are lighting the body, and in theatrical lighting, you're lighting the face. Important factors to consider. Construction facilities will impact the time required to construct stage components. If you have a full-blown shop with people to help you and you have room to keep everything, that will probably, you could do a more complicated show rather than if it's a smaller theater company and it's the costume designer who is just taking it home and they have a little sewing room, which also is an office, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. You don't have as much room. And the same thing with the shop. Do you have like a scenic shop? Do you have a full facility to build all of the sets, or do you have to do minimalistic sets because your theater company that you're working for or that is a part of the show doesn't have the capability to give you something more? Storage facilities will impact components in stock versus components needed to purchase. Depending on the type of company again you're working for, you might have a huge stock of fabrics for you to choose from, or like a whole bunch of flats that you could just revamp versus having to build. So what does your company that you're working for or that you're doing the show in, do they have the capability to have stuff already on hand, or is it stuff that's going to have to be purchased? Which then, like, everything leads back to budgeting, and I will probably say that a few more times because creating shows costs money, and sometimes you don't have the money. Storage facilities continued will impact what components will be kept and how those components will be constructed. Unfortunately, with theater, it's an industry where we throw a lot away. You do a show, and then the theater company doesn't have room to store it. So what do? They chuck it, or they donate it, or you just have all of this wood and material that you can't reuse. It's very wasteful, actually. And I have a girl who graduated a couple years ago. She did her thesis, which was over 100 pages, and it was about how to be environmentally conscious with our theater choices and design choices, because we do waste so much by just being like, do it for the show. It's like basically wear and tear. We use it and then we lose it and we don't care about it anymore. But depending on your theater company that you work for or you're doing a show, they might have a good stock for you to like keep your stuff after, or not to keep the stuff. So kind of think about that if you want to be conscious in your design. The amount of time available informs you what materials can be used. Maybe the show is happening in 6 weeks. Okay. Making up a scenario here. Maybe you're doing a play with gladiators and you want to make everything yourself and you want it to be authentic and you wish that you could have actual metal armor for your actors, but that takes a lot of time. Do you have enough time to weld and sculpt a whole bunch of metal? Probably not. You'll probably use plastic, or in some cases you would probably use foam and like try to make it look good. So it all depends. Time, money, and people. This is a huge one. If there is one factor lacking or missing, the other two factors carry more weight. So what this kind of means is if you have, for instance, time and money, but you don't have people to build it, either you're going to have to spend all of the time to build a costume, and I'm going to just use costuming because that's the easiest example in my head, or since you have money, you're just going to go out and buy stuff and you have the time to search for it. So, and then the opposite, if you have people and money, you throw a whole bunch of money so you can have that people power to make up for the time you don't have and you work into overdrive. And then if you have, what is left? Time and people, but not money, you're going to DIY that whole thing and do it the cheapest way that you can find it and just use it. And some considerations to have is, does the show travel? Is it planned to remount at a later time, which means disassembling and reassembling, and you have to rebuild it on location. So I have had, if you're going to do a show where it's just going to be done here, or if a show is in rep, right, which when shows are in rep, that means it'll play for maybe a week, you take it all down, and then you put up the other show, and then that plays for a week, and then again you take it all down, and then you play the other show. So it's like a whole thing. And doing shows in rep is common, and a lot of times if you do it in like that in rep, it's always in the same space. Maybe you think of ways that you could use some of the same pieces, like maybe the same platform is used. But one thing is that you have to be able to make the stage or the set something that's easy to take apart and put back together. And like I've done rep before, and it was one time the biggest thing was like it was the same deck that everybody used, the same platform, which looked like a wood deck. But the only difference is that there's this giant staircase that like goes up to nowhere, and I think people kind of use, but like not really use. It was really weird. It was Buried Child, which was the Sam Shepard play, and the other one was Lie of the Mind. So it's kind of in the same world, so they were allowed to use some of the same pieces, but we would have to take down that staircase in an hour in order to set for the next show that would be in like 2 hours when we did them on the same day and they switch. That's insane. Or I've done a summer stock before where it's where it was 1 week, and it was 4 or 5 hours to do the whole thing. And that's, again, like not a lot of time. Sometimes we'd stay later, but the next day you have a show. And in a lot of ways, like when you do shows like that, you definitely, for lighting, you would use the same lighting plot. It would just be a different show inputted in the board. But yeah, if your show travels, you need to think about like, how will my costumes travel? Can they like be fit into garment bags and delicately crossed? Is it the type of material that can be used again and again, or is it going to fall apart? Like we joke that Forever 21 clothing is wear and tear. That type of clothing would not do well in a traveling show. So it needs to be constructed differently depending on what kind of show it is. 3 material qualities to consider. Durability, the quality of a product that withstands the rigors of stage use time and time again. Example, fabrics need to take wind, stage needs to hold weight. And I have a teacher in another class called Theater Management, and he does shows on Broadway that they do every year. He puts in an emergency budget, like a rainy day. He knows that costumes will have to be replaced maybe on a yearly basis, and that costs money. But he puts that in a budget because he knows if you perform 7 shows a week, 5 days a week, or whatever it is. I think they're dark on Mondays, but I could be wrong. But you're performing, that's so many shows in a year. That costume is going to take a beating night after night. So you need to think about making it durable, but you know it won't last forever. Variability, the ability of a product to be able to change and to take on other uses. Example, complementary gel colors. Clay flower pots become roofing tiles, or fish netting as a tunic. And then here, attached in the PowerPoint notes is a video, and it's people playing. Now you see it on Fremont Street too, people playing drumming with like weird instruments, or they're not even instruments, they're like plastic buckets and things like that. They're taking stuff that wouldn't necessarily be thought of a drum set, but making it work because that's what they had. And then we have aesthetic appeal. Finished appearance of all stage elements that fit the designer, director, and vision of the production. And it should help advance the story. Some more considerations. Natural versus man-made. Materials that mimic others. Dyes, painting techniques, It's all about fooling the eye. And cosplay today is a great example, and there's a video also attached in the PowerPoint of a guy, he's making armor, just like pictured here, and it's obviously not steel. It's not like what real armor would be made out of, but he does a good job faking it and fooling the eye, and it looks really good. So cosplayers definitely, just like costumers and like all type of designers, have a really good way of, making it their own. Moving right along to chapter 7, design area paperwork. Before I get into it, I just have to say paperwork, as boring as it is incredibly important. And I guess I might be saying that because I'm a stage manager, but knowing what's going on stage is incredibly important, because then if you can look to your paperwork and be like, oh, who does this hat belong to, for instance with costume, and then you can find out. Anyway, we'll get more into why paperwork is so important in a sec. Objectives and outcomes. Read chapter 7, watch the embedded videos, understand what forms papers designers use and why designers use inspirational images and collages. First, we have an action chart, or more commonly known as a scene breakdown. And again, before I get into this, a scene breakdown is something usually that a stage manager does, but a lot of times costume designers do it for themselves too, or they use the stage managers and then make their own. But a scene breakdown is a chart that outlines each scene in a play, includes what happens in the scene, page, locations of place, and actors, and overall mood of the scene. I lied to you. A scene breakdown does not have all of that, but an action chart that a designer would make does. So as you can see in this example, there are different, like it says the act. So we see the first one is Act 2, Scene 3. So that's what the 2-3 means. It's day 2 in the world of the play. I guess they decided it's Monday early morning. They're in the friar's garden. Romeo asks the friar to marry him to Juliet. Outdoors, there's no chandelier, private, hint of daylight, mysterious, outdoors, garden, indoors, light shaft through door. So with this action of that, just like that first line, what information do we figure out with that? So if it's morning and we know that the scene before, Romeo just had the balcony scene, I'm pretty sure that's the scene before, with Juliet, and so he's had a late night. He could still be in the same clothing he was in the night before, or maybe he stopped home and rushed to just put on a t-shirt and jeans if it's more modern. The friar, he's an older gentleman, he's starting his day, maybe he's in whatever his work outfit for that day is, and he probably wakes up earlier than Romeo. We're just making assumptions here to kind of help your design juices flow. Does the friar have a cup of coffee because it's, again, early morning and Romeo is coming into his space? Is he watering his plants? Depending on, again, the era we're going for, does he have a watering can? Does he have a hose? Probably a watering can, because a hose would be a nightmare on stage. But something to think about, and that's a director and designer can talk about that. With lighting and scenic, the notes say outdoor, no chandelier, private, hint of daylight, mysterious. Is this like right outside his office door, maybe? And it's just like for the set, you just have a little bit of like brick walling or something to show that this is the outside and there is a door right there. So then you kind of get the sense of where you are. Is the lighting very mellow because it is the daytime and the beginning of the day versus a harsh afternoon sun, which could be a harsher yellow light? I don't know. So these are things to think about when you're reading the scene as a designer. What do you envision? I didn't talk about sound. So since it's daylight and outdoors, does that mean there are birds chirping? Are you in a city? Are there cityscapes? Do you hear kids on a bike? I don't know. Things to think about. And then this next slide is a more traditional what a scene breakdown looks like. It's basically just the character, or if it's an actor who plays a lot of different characters, you just write the actor's name, and then sometimes you would write in the thing like you're playing Tumnus right now or whatever. So you have character, actor, and then the page and scenes. So then you know who's in what scene, when, and where. Inspirational images. A visual foundation of an objects or state of being that represents the theme, action, and characters of the story. Images, they can tell you something. Like if we're just looking at this, there's a lot of blue. We obviously are by the water. It feels calm. It feels, easygoing and relaxing. Additional images represents the theme, action, characters of the story. Just like art, inspiration is subjective. It needs to mean something to you, the designer. And for everything that I've done so far, school and non-school, we've always, on the first rehearsal, you have design presentations where they kind of tell. So actors are not involved in any of the pre-conversations before rehearsal. Director, stage manager, we get to talk and this is with designers, and we kind of know what's going on. And designers come in with an idea of what they want to do, and the first rehearsal is where you kind of clue in the actors. You're like, hey, this is what we've been working on, welcome. And you tell them, these are what I see for your character for costumes. This is what I feel like the lighting of the world should be. And a lot of times, because you didn't have your actors' pictures, you haven't done measurements or anything like that yet, you haven't created the renderings for their costumes, or you obviously haven't hung lights in a theater, so you don't have lighting looks. Maybe the set is still in work, so it hasn't been finally designed, but you can kind of give them an idea. So especially for lighting and costumes, you have these inspirational images where you're like, and sets. So you tell them these are the things that inspired me. These are the moods that I'm feeling. Especially with lighting, you'll be like, these are moods. And I'll show you an example of one. Here's an example of a design presentation from a show I did called The Flick. So you have everyone listed. Great. And then you have the titles, who did it. So The Flick was a play that was in a theater. So what kind of theater is it? Douglas Hill, who's the director, said a smaller theater with a feel of intimacy. Locally owned movie house with 3 or 4 theaters in it, trying to stay afloat against the megaplexes with their reclining seats and chi-chi snacks. A moment in time with a forgotten theater with forgotten people, which leads us to, this is an inspiration that the set designer had. He was inspired by the general look of this kind of theater in Anaheim, California. And then he got some other looks of theaters which kind of also fell into what he thought was the look. And then the colors he wanted more reds and golds and kind of warmer colors for this theater. And then these were actually the paint color treatment that we had on the walls, and then these were actually the curtains that we used, or the material that we used for the curtains. And then the set designer shares the paint elevations and sections, so then the actors get more of an idea to see exactly what is going on. Technical direction always does something too, but they usually always just share a ground plan. They don't have, because they're building, so. It's fine. Costume design, we see that this was her mood board for the character Avery. He's trendy, fashionable, not overly put together, but someone that obviously comes from upper middle class family. We had a character named Rose. She's edgy and intimidating, openly sexual with cutouts and ripped clothing. She's a little bit more punky, a little bit, just edgy. That was a good word for it. Then we have Sam. This is the mood board for his costumes. Oversized and faded in a way that just isn't fashionable anymore, and he just doesn't care. He's kind of a slacker, and that kind of reflects in his costume choices. And then we have our dreaming man, who is just a man who fell asleep in the theater. He's an eccentric old man with stylish flair, doesn't care what you think about his clothes. He's a film buff, complete opposite of Skylar, who this character was double cast. And the mood board for Skylar is a young professional making his way into the world. If a business casual boat shoe were a person, it would be Skylar. And then we move on to renderings. So what she took from, and then of course they have to be in their uniforms for the movie theater. So this is how those moods from the board and her inspirational images have affected how their uniforms and how things actually look. So we can see that Avery, he's put together but still young, and he's, he has some fashionable shoes. Rose, her pants are ripped. She somehow, she's always wearing her flannel around her neck, and she's wearing a choker, and she has colored hair. And then Sam, just like the inspirational photos, his shirt is baggy, his jeans are baggy, and he just doesn't care. And then the dreaming man, yeah, he's eccentric. He's an eccentric old man, ready to go. And then later they get different uniforms, so that's what this is. And then there's a scene where they're in their street clothing, and as we can see, Sam is in his Sublime shirt and Avery is in a sweater. Then lighting design, there's not much, so inspirational images. He was thinking about the kind of lighting that would be in the theater and the kind of moods. Obviously, having a glow of the screen that is people viewing, like that kind of halo, that was important to have. So here, and then there's one scene where Avery is on the phone with his therapist, and he wanted it to be darker. So a lot of the lights were off in the theater, and there was a lot of shadows, which also kind of double played into what Avery, the character, was feeling, because he has gone through some depression, and he actually had tried to commit suicide before the play started. So it's kind of like he's also in the darkness, and that's the mood that the lighting designer wanted to play and give to the audience to see. And then for the dreaming man scene, it's some weird, it was like not of this world moment, and so he wanted some colors because this is a realistic play. So like, why would you have weird greens and reds on the stage? You wouldn't. But this is like a moment in time that takes us out of reality, and so he wanted to see that. And here's those are some of his inspirational images. And then the theater gets sold, and so instead of having the warmer lighting from an old type of movie theater, it turns into stark, rigid lighting, like the ones you have in classrooms or like hospitals. So that was his inspiration. And then the sound design, background sounds like popcorn, maybe. I don't think that actually happened, but it was a lot of transition music, and there was atmospherics of the. So I hope that was helpful of like what more inspirational images do and like how they help a designer, and it helps get their message across when they're explaining it. All of those pictures meant something to them and their designs, and they justified it, so then it meant something to everyone. Designers use collages, which are two-dimensional representations of any step of the design process. Examples: research into the period, the style, the color, textures, silhouettes, primary research. This is a visual tool for the design process. It helps focus aspects of the design, helps describe design concepts to the director, the design team, the technicians, staff, actors, crew, and sometimes the audience. And how it helps the audience sometimes is that these pre-work paperwork that designers do sometimes get put into the lobby as a lobby display, and the designers will sometimes give a little blurb of like what they were thinking and everything, and then the audience member can be like, oh wow, that is where they got the inspiration for their costume, and then they go and see the play and they're like, oh yes, that does look kind of like the costume in the drawing. So it helps give more of a full. And then here's an example of a design collage. This looks like a really cool play. And here's another collage. And collages. The first step after the collages are rough sketches of things. So you sit down and you do a thumbnail sketch of a costume, or maybe you do a rough sketch of a set, and it shows the gestures, the mass, and the position of everything you want. It's not technical yet where you have all of the measurements. It's just to get a good idea. And then you move on into, for the scenic world, set elevations, which give precise details about the set, such as height, width, and any other additional measurements that you would need. And then a lot of times the technical director will, like you're seeing this picture, like these pictures of a door and these balcony treatment, or the balcony drawing, and then this next one, which is a wagon. These would be things that the TD would probably draw. A set designer will be like, these are the things I want, here's a drawing, and they'll give you kind of some like dimensions, but then a technical director will be like, okay, I'm going to build it. So how am I going to build it? What materials am I going to build it out of? And like, what are the exact kind of dimensions that we need in order for me to build it? So a scenic designer will give the set design. Yep. The scenic designer will give the technical director information as a good base, but then it's the job of the technical director to make it come to life. And sometimes we have scenic models, which is a three-dimensional representation of the set, but a lot of times people do not do this anymore, which the scenic model is helpful in a way for directors because you can't see the set, and you have the stage manager just takes the ground plan and tapes down the dimensions of the set, but actors always ignore the lines and stuff. But not always, sorry team. But with the actual dimension, or like the 3D model, you can see like, oh, okay, there's a pillar, but I want you to have your entrance between the pillar and the back wall. And a director will take the 3D model and show everyone exactly what they mean from what is in the model, because you just don't have your real set. And like it can give people a better idea of what to expect rather than the tape on the ground. A ground plan is a bird's eye view of the set in relation to the performance venue. Ground plans may include soft goods, linen sets, and the house. So yeah, you might see the audience in there, and you can see these squiggly lines are a lot of the times curtains. And then this back line is the scrim. But yeah, and ground plans are, as I just mentioned like a minute ago, really important to stage manager because that's what we use to tape out the set so the actors in their rehearsal room can kind of see what they would have. We have the front elevations, which are drawings from the viewpoint of the audience. These precede paint elevations. So you get a good look at everything, kind of see how things should look from the audience's point of view. You have a section. Scenic and lighting designers need these. The space and set are divided into halves that follow the center line. Then you have paint elevations, which illustrate paint colors and textures of the set. You can see what colors are being used and where, and then how it's all going to look together. Technical drawings, which these are the ones that would be done by a technical director, are any object needing construction must have corresponding drawings illustrating dimensions. Lighting elevations. A painting, chalk sketch, or computer rendering of a light in a scene. A lot of times, not all lighting designers do this, but some do. I think I've only seen one lighting designer in grad school use this, and I have never seen anybody else actually. So yeah, you can kind of get a look of like how all of the lighting is going to look on the person who's performing at this banquet. And then you can see how the light looks against this set by the colors they use. A light plot is similar to a ground plan as it is in bird's eye view of all the lighting instruments hung in the space. So you have all of the different pipes, and this will tell you what kind of instruments are being used in each section or on everywhere on the stage, and then where they're pointed to. Magic sheets, a personal reference to lights that hit a particular area, includes the color and the direction. You have your channel hookup sheet, which is also for lighting. It includes and organizes each individual light fixture, plotted such as the channel number, the dimmer, location, color, type of fixture, and type of gobo. Yeah, eventually there's a lot of lighting instruments, so this helps you keep track of what everything is. Yeah, it could be a lot. Then you have a cue sheet, which lists all lighting cue numbers when they're taken on, page number, time, and descriptions of scene and look. You have, which then this is useful for when you have then paper tech, which is where the stage manager is given all of the cues from lighting and sound, and then if there's projections, which don't normally happen all the time, and then sometimes if it's like a really weird set, like if there's a lot of movement and you need a scenic designer to be like, hey, when do my fly rails come in and out, they would be there for that too. And then final dress day of opening, the stage manager receives the final sheet. Yeah, final dress, hopefully not opening, but you have they just need to update it from any changes that were made the night before. And then as you can see, it says the page number, the lighting cue, how long the lighting cue lasts, where it's called, and the description and any notes that they may have. Costume thumbnails. They explore the silhouettes. And these are like their quick drawings as well, like their sketches. You have color roughs. After thumbnails, color and texture is added to include fabric swatches and appropriate body type for the characters. And it's good to know sometimes when you see these pictures without the fabric, it's hard for directors, particularly, like they like to feel the fabric and kind of see what everything would look together and feel like and flow together. It's really helpful to add those fabric swatches onto the costume rendering. And then this is an example of a costume rendering of Mary Poppins, and you can kind of see how it became real. So that's real life. Complete costume sketches or the costume renderings include the mood of the play, all costume pieces, and makeup and wigs. And just like lighting, and they also have designer worksheets. So they have something called a piece list, which will say what everybody is wearing in what scene. So if there are quick changes, like the character has to take off her scarf for that scene because maybe the next scene she doesn't need her scarf because she's inside. But that would be on the run sheet for costume, so your wardrobe crew would know what to get and what needs to be on or off the actor at that time. And then if something goes missing, you'll be like, oh, she exited stage left with the scarf, and you can hopefully, maybe she dropped it over there. So yeah, it helps you just kind of see what everything should be like per scene. Costume plot and wardrobe check-in sheet. A costume plot is an outline or written list of what each actor wears from start to finish. Oh, yep. And then the wardrobe check-in sheet. The wardrobe crew checks in all costumes and pieces to make sure they're accounted for. This can be a lengthy process, but I have learned the importance of it because things go missing constantly in theaters. And as a stage manager, I started making a checklist, check in and check out for props, because you might have your pie during the day and you're shooting, and then all of a sudden, I don't know, it ends up in a weird place. We're doing human comedy stuff this weekend, and I was looking for a book, and I was like, where is this book? And the actor put it on the sound table, which is near the prop table, but I was like, oh, wow, okay. I may have never figured that out if I wasn't looking hard enough, and I was like, okay. So it was just wrong table. Anyway, good to know. So then the next day you're like, where's that book? You just put it back too. And then sound does the same kind of similar thing. So sound has a speaker plot that you do just like with lighting, but it's not maybe as sophisticated as lighting because you don't have as many speakers, but you plot out, and I usually do it over the ground plan and just say where I want my speakers, kind of just so lighting knows. And then you also do, just like lighting, a cue sheet. And as you can see, like I'm working on a sound plot right now, so I'll show you it. And it says things like Alan's cue, who's a stage manager, and then MSS is me. And his cues are just like, they go in 5, 10, 15, 20, because if there's anything I need to add, it's in between. I can do like a 2 or a 3. But then my cues, you can see, are different, where it says things like 1.2. What does that mean? That means, for me, I know that's a cue on page 1 and it's my second cue that I take on page 1. So same thing, if it's 3-3, the cue is on page 3 and it's the third cue on page 3. So that way I can kind of track, no matter where we are, where it would be in the play. And then I like to write the part, act, and scene and page. So pre-0, it's pre-show, it's not even in a cue. Or this section is called What I Like 1, it's on page 1. There are no acts in this play, so it's a little weird. The description, I'll just stick with the first one. It's sound check. There are no cue lines and I have no notes, but the next one you can see is pre-show music. It's pre-show is the cue, so when you're about to start house. And then it's the songs that had been requested from the directors need to be mashed together in some way. So yes, sound also has